Tonight on Brian Ross Investigates. New questions about the relationship of sexual predator Jeffrey Epstein with Donald Trump after NBC News unearthed this footage of Epstein and Trump partying together in 1992. Where does the investigation go next?
All victims of Jeffrey Epstein have rights. They have a right to be heard. Those rights were infringed upon the first time, and they're not going to be infringed upon this time.
Prince Andrew of England and former President Clinton both had close relationships with Epstein, but they both deny knowing anything about Epstein's abuse of underage girls.
If you are a victim of Jeffrey Epstein, then you know what I know. He will never stop sexually abusing children until he is in jail.
Plus, the unfolding scandal in Los Angeles of the powerful leader of a church with millions of members, also accused of the rape and abuse of underage girls.
Religion was used against these girls. They were told if they didn't comply, they were sinning.
Like the Epstein allegations, the discovery of graphic videos of his alleged victims.
We have a situation where the defendant uses members of his congregation and uses members of his church to get young girls to please him sexually.
And our shout out for the reporter whose first published story led to big changes in the treatment of women in the state prisons of Tennessee.
And I thought, maybe I'm just not good enough to do this, and that it would be a real disservice to these people to put this amateur basically on this thing, which is essentially their lives.
From the Law and Crime Network studios in New York City's Herald Square, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening and welcome. Tonight, disturbing new evidence in two remarkably similar cases of wealthy, powerful men abusing underage girls. In New York, multimillionaire and friend of presidents Jeffrey Epstein. And in Los Angeles, the leader of a little-known church which claims 5 million members in all 50 states and 57 other countries. We start with the case of Jeffrey Epstein. Today in New York, a federal judge ordered Epstein held without bail while he awaits trial on sex trafficking charges. The case gets a lot of attention because of Epstein's powerful friends, including Donald Trump, seen in this video NBC News made public this week showing Trump and Epstein partying together in 1992. Since his arrest, President Trump has gone out of his way to say he cut off his relationship with Epstein many years ago and knows nothing about the abuse allegations.
Well, I knew him like everybody in Palm Beach knew him. I mean, people in Palm Beach knew him. He was a fixture in Palm Beach. I had a falling out with him a long time ago. I don't think I've spoken to him for 15 years. I wasn't a fan. I was not, a long time ago. I'd say maybe 15 years. I was not a fan of his.
But for Trump and former President Clinton, their one-time friendship with Epstein is sure to be an issue that will not go away. Trump and others who spent time with Epstein, including Prince Andrew of England and former President Clinton, have all denied knowing anything about his abuse of underage girls. But lawyer Bradley Edwards, who represents a number of the victims, says anyone who spent time with Epstein could end up as a witness.
There were other business associates of Mr. Epstein's who engaged in improper sexual misconduct at one or more of his homes. We do know that. I cannot release the who's who of who that is. I don't think that going down the path of was it this person or was it that person, we would literally be here playing the guessing game all day. It's not helpful for our investigation to reveal those names, but I do think that in due time, the names are going to start coming out. I will say, on that topic, if you were a friend or associate of Mr. Epstein's, if you were regularly in his, if you're regularly with him, if you made observations or heard things, it is important that you come forward and provide the information that you know, especially if you were not involved in any misconduct.
Appearing with Edwards was one of his clients, one of the dozens of victims of Jeffrey Epstein, who urged other victims to come forward to make sure the government pursued the case as far as it could.
It's time for the government to do the right thing for me and all the other victims still fighting for rights in the CVRA case in Florida. This is no surprise that Jeffrey Epstein was also sexually abusing girls in New York. He did it everywhere. And as long as the victims speak up, he isn't going to get away this time.
Next, the other sex abuse case of another powerful man, the leader of a church claiming 5 million members, who claims he is the apostle of Jesus. We're back now with a close look at a case that is receiving much less attention than that of Jeffrey Epstein, but is remarkably similar in almost every aspect. A man of power and money under arrest for abusing underage girls, with graphic new evidence of his alleged crimes playing out in court. Nason Joaquin Garcia leads a church that calls itself the Light of the World. It claims 5 million members in 58 countries, including churches in all 50 American states. Garcia says he is the apostle of Jesus. The California prosecutors allege he used his power in the church to recruit and abuse and rape underage girls in the congregation, charges he has denied. In a 2-day hearing this week in Los Angeles to determine if Joaquin Garcia should be kept behind bars while he awaits trial, the state attorney general's prosecutors revealed some of the sordid evidence they say they have against him. The first witness was Department of Justice Task Force agent Stephen Stover.
On the iPhone, I found videos depicting girls, on one particular video, 4 girls engaged in oral copulation on each other.
Another agent, Troy Holmes, described the millions of dollars flowing into Garcia's bank account.
Wells Fargo sent me what's called a suspicious activity report, or commonly known as a SAR, and it had information that they felt was suspicious regarding an account open in the benefit of Mr. Garcia.
Would it be correct that that account received approximately $5 million over the course of 1 week in June?
Yes, it would be.
Joaquin Garcia's lawyers told the judge he should be released.
First, that he had no criminal record. My client has no criminal record. 2, no history of flight risk. My client has no history of flight risk. He should be getting bail at schedule. In order for no bail to happen, it has to be a substantial deviation.
The Attorney General's office strongly disagreed.
I think if ever there was a case, a sexual assault case that deserves no bail, it's this case. In this instance, as the court is aware, the court must presume that the charges are true, and the charges are serious and they are violent against young girls in this case. We have a situation where we have a defendant who has used his power in the church to take advantage of young girls. He has used co-defendants to solicit and groom young girls so that they can service him in a sexual way.
And prosecutors said there is evidence that the church leader was helped in the abuse of the young girls by their own parents.
The parents of the girls in this case, the victims in this case, actually facilitate their abuse because they believe it to be a blessing to those young women. So we're in a situation where all of the other young women who the defendant may have access to, all of the other young women who are part of a community that folks like the co-defendants might recruit girls from, have no one to protect them.
The judge in the case ruled he had heard enough that the church leader might bodily harm those young women who agreed to testify against him.
And frankly, based upon evidence I've heard yesterday, I do find that there is enough evidence to sustain a conviction. Because in this case, you have very detailed allegations by Jane Doe's 1, 2, 3, and 4. You also have an inordinate amount of pornography, child pornography, videos on Mr. Garcia's telephone and iPad. And reason and common sense dictates to this court, and that's beyond a reasonable doubt. You use reason, you use common sense, that these images are Mr. Garcia's, that these were not somehow planted on his phone by some sort of conspiracy against him. So I find that in this case, that there is certainly enough evidence to sustain a conviction, and I do find that he is a great risk to the community. The use of religion in this case, the way he has power over these people as a leader of his church, I mean, religion was used against these girls. They were told that they didn't comply, they were sinning. They were told that if a king can have mistresses. And what is particularly disturbing to the court is the allegation that, essentially, that they would be going against God if they disobeyed the apostle, that is defendant Garcia, and that essentially because he is the apostle, he had carte blanche and could do what he wanted.
The case against Joaquin Garcia is being closely followed by people in the small Georgia town of Flowery Branch. His church has been buying up property there and making plans to create a huge religious complex with shopping malls and restaurants that could accommodate more than 100,000 people. Efforts by local residents to block the project have now taken on added urgency with the criminal charges against the church leaders and several of his key lieutenants. Joining us now to talk about that from Flowery Branch is Doug Davis, who's been helping to lead the efforts to block the church project. Mr. Davis, thanks for joining us. How close are you to the church property?
Hi, Brian. Thank you for having me. Right here behind me, approximately 50 yards away, is where the church property begins. And this is the large parcel, the 300-acre parcel. And there are several others that they have purchased along this road, about a dozen in all.
So what's been your reaction and the reaction of others in Flowery Branch to the charges brought against Joaquin Garcia?
Well, it's been very two-sided, to tell you the truth. We don't want to hear about anyone being victimized, especially children. We're heartbroken for the people that have had to endure this. But on the other side of the coin, Brian, we're almost jubilant, and we feel a sense of validation in the fight that we've been, trying to stop this complex from being built in our neighborhood. So it's bittersweet.
And what is it about the property being built in your neighborhood that bothers you?
Well, for one, this is going to be a mostly tax-free entity because it is religious. We live in a small town, and we cannot facilitate and manage to it's going to put a strain on our schools. It's going to put a strain on our taxes and our property values. And we have approximately 8,000 people in our city, and they are talking about permanently moving 3 times that into an area of 300 acres. And once a year, they have the Holy Supper that can be from 150 to 200,000 people. We're just not equipped to deal with that sort of influx of people here. We are a small town. We live here and love it here because we have that small town peace of mind. We like to be able to know our neighbors and to run into people that we know at the grocery stores. And it just doesn't facilitate the type of life that we would want for our children with that many people moving into our area.
Mr. Davis, we have a question for you from our control room from executive producer Rhonda Schwartz, a Helping Rhonda moment. Rhonda, your question?
Doug, you first knew that it just was a church moving in. Was there concern because it was a church?
Oh, no, ma'am. There's no concern about it being a church in specific, but once we got the copy of the master plan for what they were planning on putting over here, and for the amount of people that it was going to house, that's when the concerns really started. We are not prepared to triple our population in just this small area. There are 3 grocery stores within reasonable distance of our homes, and there's no way that that the grocery stores could even keep food in stock for that kind of that population of people.
Mr. Davis, the church leaders have claimed at times that you are racist, that you're opposed to this church because so many of its members are from south of the border.
Yes, I've seen the video where Jack Freeman has said that this is a holy war against us and that we're trying to run them out and that we're racist. But the fact of the matter is, this is our home. No one's trying to run them out. We are here. We do not want our way of life and our community compromised. This has nothing to do with race. We have got people from all over the place that already live here in Flowery Branch, and we love them all and welcome them all equally. It's just a matter of whenever something of this magnitude tries to set up shop in a town of this size, it's preposterous. This is the size of our largest mall here, which is about 20 minutes from us, is approximately the size of what they're trying to put across the street from our homes. And it's just, I just don't see any way that we could all coexist without our community suffering.
Mr. Davis, we only have about 30 seconds left, but are you concerned about the tactics of the church? Some of their ministers have said they're going to war with you.
Yes, sir, and it is a little unnerving because we don't feel like we are in a war. We feel like we are protecting our way of life in our community, and we are trying to do the right thing for the lives of our children and for our quality of life. We are not waging a war against anybody. We are just trying to hold on to the peace of mind that we have and take care of what's ours. We don't want to be ran out of our homes and out of our community, but if they wanted to go about it a different way, we would have welcomed them with open arms.
Well, Doug Davis in Flowery Branch, thank you for joining us. Keep us posted on all the developments there. I'm sure there are more to come.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Up next, our shout out for the reporter who first published story revealed shocking conditions for women as young as 16 being held inside Tennessee prisons. When we come back. And our shout out tonight for our rookie journalist who showed right away on his very first assignment he's a real pro, diving into the use of solitary confinement for prisoners, a practice that many leading criminologists say amounts to torture when used over long periods of time. The untold story of what was happening in the Tennessee prison system to women as young as 16 was the first story ever published by a graduate student named Alan Arthur.
I mean, outside of a class assignment, a couple class assignments, this was by far the biggest thing I had ever written and the first thing I had really published.
What Arthur discovered with the team from the Tennessean newspaper and USA Today was dozens of women locked up in solitary confinement for months and months, simply because they had medical conditions or behavioral issues local jails could not accommodate.
My first thought was sort of disbelief, but then the more I learned about it, the more I started to feel, if not injustice, definitely a sense of a sadness that a lot of people were stuck in this position.
Arthur, who is active in trying to help people who have been in prison with a streaming video art show, connected with a whistleblower to help him. Dr. Allie Winters, a senior clinical therapist who helped him and his readers understand the toll of lengthy solitary confinement.
Everybody changes. Everybody. You cannot go into a human being cannot go into solitary confinement and not change.
I don't think I was the first person she tried to reach out to. I might have been the least likely, a grad school journalism student in New York City. But for whatever reason, nobody else ran with it, and I did, and fortunately we were able to make some impact.
Arthur's printed stories and a companion video produced by the Tennessean and the nonprofit Marshall Project told a compelling story featuring the plight of some of the women who had been through it.
She said, you're in prison, committed a crime. I said, I've not been found guilty of that crime yet.
It's never easy to hear people in these cases. I'm pretty much asking people to recount the worst moment of their life and sometimes the worst years of their life. And it certainly takes a mental toll on them, and it takes a mental toll on me. Any journalist who's reported on this kind of thing can vouch for that. And I cared about these people, not, some of them had done bad things in their lives for sure, but I felt for them and believed they deserved their day in court.
But as a rookie investigative journalist, Arthur says he was worried he wasn't up to the task.
I thought, maybe I'm just not good enough to do this, and that it would be a real disservice to these people to put this amateur basically on this thing, which is essentially their lives, that I had to get it right, because if I didn't, they're recounting these very painful things that they've never had a chance to talk about. And if I botched that, I would never forgive myself.
His stories became big news in Tennessee, helping lead to the release of some of the teenagers who had been locked up in solitary confinement.
A 16-year-old is out of prison tonight after a nonprofit paid her $60,000 bail. Fox 13's Zach Crenshaw was there as Rosalind Holmes reunited with some of her family members.
In her slippers and khakis, 16-year-old Rosalind Bird was on the outside for the first time in more than 3 months.
I'm thankful for the people that paid my bond.
And the stories led to a new law signed by the governor that essentially curbed the practice for minors and ordered better oversight when involving adults.
The legislation that was introduced as a result was introduced by a Democrat and a Republican, so it was pretty bipartisan. And the governor said, I'll sign it. The idea that maybe one person or two people could get out of solitary confinement because of this, I think it was a responsibility to them, a responsibility to Dr. Winters for what she had witnessed, which takes its own toll. I think that was in the forefront of my mind, was just, you can't let these people down. They stuck it out through this. The least you can do is finish this story.
And you did.
I did. I finished it in the hospital room the night my son was born, while my wife and baby were asleep.
A life-changing moment for everyone involved. Congratulations, Alan Arthur, on your son and your story. Well, that's our program for tonight. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here next week. Good night.